Hi guys, it's Regs Up War and we're on the second leg of our UK trivia tour, starting now in Guernsey. Let's get up in the air. So this flight is going to take us out the far side of Guernsey. Then we're going to come back and go over the whole of the island. And then we're going to head towards Alderney, which is the final Channel island that we're going to visit. I don't want to go too high so that we get better scenery. So Guernsey is the second largest of the Channel Islands after Jersey. As Jersey, it has one of the largest tides in the world. So when it's low tide, there's a lot more beaches around. Now I'm just going to go a little bit further out because right at the end of this promontory there is a fairy circle, which legend says, I'm hoping we can see it, legend says that if you go around it 3 times clockwise, your wish will be granted. So we'll see if we can see it as the plane shouts at me. Should just be on this edge. Oh, yeah, there we go. So it must be that circle just there. It's not quite shown, but that is a fairy circle. There's other connections to fairies on this island. Guernsey claims it had an invasion by fairies where it was an extremely bloody battle. Many died. And in fact, there is a street called Rue Rouge or Rouge Rue, Red Street, named after the blood from that battle. We've gone quite off course trying to find the fairy circle, but how many places can say that they were invaded by fairies? So we spoke in the flight from Jersey to Guernsey about Guernsey having the oldest in-use postbox. So another fact about that postbox is that it is actually the only one on the island painted red. The rest are blue. So postboxes on Jersey were green. Guernsey, they are blue. Guernsey also has its own language, similar to Jersey and Jersey. It's got sort of a Guernsey, and also was used during the occupation by Germany. Guernsey is also famous because it was the location of the first ever underwater arrest. A chap was stealing orms, which is a type of abalone, and was arrested by a police officer in scuba gear. Just come back round to get back on the flight path. I'm trying to stay a bit lower. Also, hopefully this will be better quality recording than the last one. Looks nice down there. Guernsey also has the world's smallest consecrated church in St Andrew, which is decorated really beautifully. You should look up pictures. I'll see if I can get one to go on the screen. It's all decorated in shells and bits of broken pottery. It's actually been rebuilt twice in its lifetime. So this island during the Middle Ages was actually a haven for pirates. In fact, even some of the governors that have sat in charge of the island have been privateers themselves. There's one called I can't pronounce these and I'm so sorry. Le Messier? Apologies, sincere apologies. Now, Guernsey, during the English Civil War, were actually supporters of the parliamentarians, so they are on Oliver Cromwell's side, which is different to Jersey, which was where Charles II was actually exiled. So obviously they had slightly different allegiances, which might explain why there's a New Jersey in America and it's not called New Guernsey, which I think would be have a completely different ring to it. One not from Guernsey, but very famous resident. We'll just let the air traffic control finish. Just gain a little bit more altitude. Right. So, a famous resident of Guernsey was Victor Hugo, the author. In fact, he wrote some of his most famous works while on the island. This includes Les Miserables. Again, sincere apologies for my pronunciation. So he lived on the island for about 15 years, and said his house is actually now owned by the city of Paris, which is absolutely fascinating because the country of France hated Victor Hugo in his day. He was very anti France. France is actually visible. I don't know if you can quite see, just on the horizon over there as we head towards Alderney. It is the Channel Island which sits closest to the French coast, and weirdly closest to the English coast as well. So this is currently exactly where the sun would be for the time of day that I'm flying, but I have turned off all the clouds and the weather because, as I mentioned in my previous videos, doing a tour of the UK with the actual weather would be depressing. Just come back on course a little bit. If you have any other facts about Guernsey, let me know in the comments. Just as we fly over this small section of the English Channel. The next video is a direct flight straight over the channel. Not going to be much scenery, but there's lots and lots of interesting facts about the English Channel. So just get a little bit closer to Alderney and then we'll start talking about Alderney. I've purposely chosen this aircraft just to give a little bit of a better view. The co-pilot seat is actually situated behind me on this aircraft. Somewhere behind there. Not the best thing to do. Just relocate the view there. Depending on the distance between the areas that we're flying on the UK tour, I may change aircraft just for speed. But currently, this Cubcrafter seems the best vehicle for the job. So the flight plan actually takes us past Alderney Island and then brings us back in. So it gives us a chance to just fly past the island a little bit before we land. So as you're probably aware, all the Channel Islands were occupied during World War II by the Nazis. The strange thing about Alderney is that all the population was actually evacuated prior to the occupation, and they were all moved to mainland England. In fact, for Jersey and Guernsey, most of their children were evacuated prior to occupation. The sad thing about Alderney, the island ahead of us just now, is that because there was no local population, sadly, there were concentration camps installed on this island, one of which the entrance gates still stand. I'm not sure about the other three. I only saw evidence of one during my research. It's actually very close to the airport that we'll be landing. And as we approach the runway, just on the far side of the runway would be where that concentration camp was located. Because of what happened on the island during the occupation, the actual residents couldn't return until December of that year after the liberation in 1945, because a lot of work had to be carried out to make the island habitable again. All the wood was burnt by the occupying forces, including doorways, and just generally just tidying up after the atrocities that took place there. It's something that I didn't know until I was doing research for this. I think it's important. Slightly more cheery fact about Alderney is that one of its largest inhabitants are blonde hedgehogs. They're not albino, they're just a very fair colour. It's one of the few places that they exist. So this island has no traffic lights, it has no roundabouts, but it has no traffic, and the maximum speed is 35 miles per hour. Interestingly, as usual, I'm gaining lots of altitude because I'm flying over water. It's quite windy. Interestingly, despite Jersey and Guernsey being the larger islands, Alderney is the only one that still has a working railway. There have been railways on the other islands, including a narrow gauge built by the Germans. But in general, Alderney is the only one to this day which has a working railway. Just gonna try my best just to get back on this flight plan. Don't want to go too far to the side of the island because I want just to see it. So after the Alderney was re-inhabited after the Germans moved on, the whole island was actually run as a communal farm, controlled by mainland UK, and that was for 2 years, and then finally they went back to self-governance. Part of their government is controlled from Guernsey, and part of it is controlled by themselves. So, like, you can see the airfield just down there. So the camp would have been the other side. So just need to go a little bit wider out just to make sure when we come round to land, we're coming in correctly. So Alderney also had its own language based on Old Normandy French. Unfortunately, the language pronounced maybe Aragonese. Unfortunately, there are no longer any people who know about the language, and only a few examples written. So just go a little bit further out before we make the turn. There's actually forts all around the outside of the island. Some date prior to occupation, some date from occupation. Let's just go a little bit further out. So there's France. See how close we are? And yet England not very visible at all, if at all. So we're just going to start coming around. There's one of the forts on the outside. Okay, let's just start turning. Ooh. Need to remember to turn more. I might need to turn more weather off. Just come around a bit more. Beautiful. To come around a bit the worst part of any flight. Having to land these planes while knowingly recording it. Now, one of the things that's said about this island by the other two islands, Jersey and Guernsey, is that this is 2,000 alcoholics clinging to a rock. Apparently, they're very well known for their drinking. So we're just a little bit too far over. Hopefully, we can swing it around at the last second. Not my greatest skill. Don't know. Can't remember. Not sure why I thought having all the wind on was a good idea. Ooh. Oh, not the best landing in the world. And I pressed the wrong button, which obviously did not help in the world. Actually changed my point of view, but it took me out the backwards. But we landed. So, as always, thank you for flying Regsar Support Airlines. Make sure you like and subscribe and press the bell to get notifications of the next video. The next one, as I mentioned, we're going to head off across the English Channel and talk about some of the wild and wonderful ways that people cross